Good morning, everyone. My name is Fernando Massioli, and I am the Pennsylvania Traffic and ITS Department Manager for HNTB, and I will be the moderator for HNTB's Platinum session titled Transformational Innovations in Technology, Process, and People. We have three sessions for you today. I will briefly introduce each session and the speakers. The sessions will be up to 15 minutes, and we will hold questions until the end. Please use the Q&A or chat feature below to ask any questions, and the presenters can answer them at the end. If everything goes right, hopefully virtually, we should have about 15 minutes for any questions at the end of the presentation. Let me share my screen here. So hopefully everybody sees the screen. Um, so transformational innovations, what are some of the biggest challenges our clients have faced in recent years, and how can these challenges be overcome? Have these challenges been intensified by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic? Has the industry become slow to adapt to these changes? In this session, we will discuss transformational innovations in technology, process, and people. And what actually does that mean? This means that as an industry, we must innovate and transform how we get things done to keep pace with a changing environment, which is often outside of our control. To innovate, we must focus on things we can control, tools and methods that engineers and planners have at their disposal. As a group, we have to ramp up innovation and tackle the most challenging issues. We must foster the adoption of new and sometimes unfamiliar technologies, things that we may not be comfortable with. Develop processes and systems to implement them, and overcome hesitation, among staff in accepting new ways to do things. So in our first session, process, how virtual public involvement has evolved from niche to necessary. Erica Blond, public involvement lead for HNTB. She's out of our HNTB Boston office. Erica's focus area is using technology to reach historically underserved communities and evaluating outreach strategies using geospatial data. She earned a master's degree in urban planning from Harvard Graduate School of Design and a Bachelor of Arts in American Studies and Ethnicity, Race, and Migration from Yale University. So now I'm going to turn it over to Erica. Erica?
Thanks, Fernando. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Fernando, I think you have to cut yours for me to share.
There you go.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The trials and tribulations of VPI. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending our session. I absolutely love talking about virtual public involvement, especially when we're in a virtual setting, so I'm really excited to be here. As Fernando mentioned, I'm one of HNTB's national public involvement practitioners based out of our sunny Boston office. And I'm going to be taking you on a brief journey covering the evolution of virtual public involvement and how it's moved from being seen as a neat sort of add-on to something that's absolutely essential for today's projects. So I hold a few different lenses when I consider this process. I'm actually trained as an environmental planner, so I'm very interested in that regulatory compliance lens. How can we demonstrate consensus building and lack of substantial controversy for NEPA? I'm also deeply passionate about equity and environmental justice, as Fernando mentioned. So I often find myself asking how we can ensure that our technology is accessible and encouraging participation from all people. So I'm sure a lot of you have your own relationship and experience with the public involvement process, especially in light of COVID. So maybe you were a project manager whose task was speaking at a meeting. Maybe you're a designer who's meeting one-on-one with stakeholders to hear concerns. Maybe you're just someone that's involved in your community and who's attended a design meeting as a community member. So whatever experience you bring to the table, I hope that this presentation provides you with some new ideas to consider as we all strive to keep evolving through COVID. And if nothing else, let it at least bring you some solace that this stuff is really, really hard, but it's definitely a battle that's very much worth fighting. Okay, so here's a quick roadmap for our discussion. Will only be about 15 minutes, and then I'm looking forward to engaging with all of you after the rest of the presentations to answer any questions. So here in what I now perceive as an extremely stressful, crowded photo is our traditional means of public involvement. So we're all familiar with this. It's rigid. There's a specific time and a place. You have those fun paper sign-in sheets. You've got a room full of people, but an environment that's not necessarily conducive to encouraging participation from all parties. And so we've all heard that term vocal minority. That's used to describe the few individuals in the meeting that can kind of steer the conversation one way or the other. So at HNTB, when we started to consider moving into a virtual public involvement realm, one of the questions that we were asking ourselves and trying to answer was, how do we get away from that and really empower all participants in the public process to have a voice? So, as I mentioned at the beginning, virtual public involvement was originally meant to supplement in-person public involvement. So it's sort of an option too for those who couldn't make it to our meetings to try to get more participation. And the flexibility afforded, we hoped would allow us to reach broader geographies and demographics. So we actually partnered originally with Iowa DOT to pilot a new technology called the public involvement application. And I'll be taking you through what that application looks like for a bit of the presentation, but I wanted to start it with actually a few remarks from our partners at Iowa DOT on how they got started and some of their thinking.
I'm John Reese. I'm out of the public involvement section, and I work on 3 districts 4, 5, and 6, which is 45 counties out of 99 in Iowa.
I'm Valerie Brewer. I work with districts 1, 2, and 3 and have been with the DOT for 10 years since the beginning of PIMA.
I've been along the whole ride. So when I started, most of the stuff was on paper that we did for public involvement, but we're making that giant leap to PIMA. So it's been fun.
Yeah, so can you guys talk a little bit about what that leap was like and what the impetus for doing that was?
Yeah, Brad came up with this idea, and I think he had an idea that there was a pandemic coming or something. I don't know. It was more of a, we don't have enough staff to do what needs to be done, so we need to automate what we're doing currently. His big picture was always more automated, more transparent with the public.
We're learning these new ways of dealing with public involvement as we were developing PIMA.
What was the hardest part for you of making the shift?
I think the hardest part was getting upper management to understand what we were going to do and why we needed to do it. Now they go, oh, this was great. And even some of my transportation planners that were going to use it on a day-to-day basis were hesitant to suddenly be thrown into a more technical world than what they were used to or even comfortable with.
It's kind of interesting and kind of fun to see the shift in using more technology, especially in the past 8 months here through this pandemic. Everybody's really having to rely on technology to do things. Now we give them the options and they're totally embracing it.
So you'll hear a bit more from both Iowa DOT and one of our other partners at Maine DOT a few times throughout the presentation. But for now, I want to pivot a little bit to talking about the impact from COVID-19. So back in March, when we all went remote, we were really pushed to start thinking about virtual public involvement, less as optional and more as critical path forward. And so I think for us, this was a real turning point where we began to see virtual public involvement, VPI, as a way to really manage the entire process, from hosting meetings to collecting comments and responding, to analyzing feedback and adapting our process. So the next data I'm going to play is from our partner, Scott Rollins at Maine DOT, on his experience deploying virtual public involvement as a rapid response during COVID.
I'm a project manager in the Bridge program. I'm also pretty much managing the virtual public involvement at Maine DOT also. It really wasn't until the pandemic when we really decided we need to go all in and go all in quickly. And we had kind of had a presentation a while earlier on PIMA, and we figured this would be a really good platform that we could make work.
What kind of advice or just kind of lessons learned from having to do that so quickly and get everyone on the same page? What was that experience like for you? What would you tell other DOTs that are kind of worried about that?
Yeah, I think the big part was we just realized that we're not going to be going out to the public for a while. And we decided back in the spring that let's do it and let's just jump right in and follow suit with, what Iowa had done, and some other states were doing that. We just kind of came up with, here's a way we can do it. And this is a good process, and got that going very quickly. And within a couple of months, we actually had our first public meeting live and ready to go.
So we're talking a lot about this process. And so what does that actually look like? The way I like to think about it is as a combination and streamline of a lot of commonly used tools like email clients, comment forms, meeting platforms like Zoom, and mapping tools like Esri's GIS. So when taken all together, we really are able to form this more holistic approach to involvement, eliminating those information silos and minimizing opportunities for things to fall through the cracks. So the projects we work on are complex. They're often spanning many years with many different partners, and having one centralized system is a way that we can ensure a comprehensive and consistent process. So here's a fun graphic to kind of illustrate that. So again, just kind of the input of data processing system, email and comment tools, meeting platforms, and then the output, it's all consolidated into one centralized management process. So obviously this comes with some challenges with implementing any new technology. So overcoming that first hurdle to presenting a new way of doing things is always a challenge. But I think what we found the most important is that the solution we come up with has to be the right one for the problem presented. And so what we like to do is conduct a lot of discovery kind of with our partners, taking the time to learn about what their existing SOPs are and their existing operations, and then identify those rooms for growth and where those silos exist. And that way, as we're kind of building out the right solution, we're bringing staff along for the process and making sure that this is a process that's not only going to work for the public, but that's going to work for the agencies as well. There's a lot of benefits to doing virtual public involvement, as I'm sure many of you have seen over the last 9 months. So for me, the most significant benefit is how these tools can help us reach a more diverse stakeholder base than ever before. So what you're looking at here on the screen is a map showing comments received on a project for one of our partners, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And so you're seeing all of the comments that we've received for this project overlaid with environmental justice populations. And so what this helps us do is see kind of that wide range of stakeholders that we're able to reach. These virtual public involvement tools really empower stakeholders, giving them greater and more convenient opportunities to participate in the process. And that in turn helps us inform better design and lead to better projects. So the tool that I mentioned earlier, the public involvement management application, was originated with Iowa DOT, and it's now being used at a number of transportation agencies nationwide. And it's comprised of 4 primary components that you see here on the screen. So that's the comment form and sign-in, the response management workflow, analytics, and stakeholder and event management. And they all feed into this core engine. And I'm going to briefly walk through kind of what each of those elements does. So the first and most obvious step here in the public process is getting the feedback itself. So to do that, we use custom comment forms that are Section 508 accessibility tested and available in various languages depending on the project area. And so here what you're seeing on the screen is an integration with Esri ArcMap, like you're seeing on the iPad, that allows stakeholders to drop a pin on the map of the project to show an area of interest or concern. They can also share with us, as you're seeing at the bottom there, their favorability on the project and how they'd actually like to receive a response to their comment, whether that be via phone, mail, or email. And so for us, again, it's all about being able to put the power and the autonomy back in the hands of the stakeholder and enable that two-way conversation between them and the DOT. So then once the feedback comes in, it gets aggregated into one centralized database. And this helps us avoid having to forward emails and use Excel tracking sheets and all those things that we're very accustomed to over the years. So staff are able to read comments, they're able to draft a response and determine what department is best suited to provide a response. And then the system can then forward a notification to those individuals, letting them know that, hey, there's something here you should take a look at. And this is great because it keeps a record of all of the responses that get sent and who sent them, which is really important for NEPA compliance and again, to encourage that two-way conversation with our stakeholders. So then, of course, another critical piece of the process is analyzing the feedback that's provided and being able to adapt process based on the feedback. And so this is especially important in these virtual settings where you can't really read the room in the way that you typically would. So here you're looking at a heat map, as I like to call it, of comments that help us really identify areas of concern within our project area. We've also got a number of charts that really help us measure how many stakeholders we're reaching using the different methods of engagement, whether it's a virtual meeting, whether it's just a comment form, whether it's an Esri story map. And then using this information, we're then able to adapt our process kind of as it's ongoing to best suit the needs of those specific communities. So here's my fun, flashy slide to show the final element here, which is the online meeting itself. And so through PIMA, the invitations, the attendance tracking, and the hosting of the meeting itself is all built in. There's several options for hosting the meeting. I'm obviously showing the virtual reality room, but we also have more traditional links with things like YouTube, and as I mentioned, Esri story maps. And so by really centralizing the meeting and integrating it with the other tools that I've gone through here and in the other 3 slides, what we're able to do is really make sure that we've undergone a very comprehensive process and that we've been able to track, again, for that environmental compliance and just general best practices to make sure that our process is as transparent and inclusive as possible. So I'm going to turn it back over to our partners at Iowa DOT to talk about how they've been able to take their experience with virtual public involvement and then share that with some other partners across the country.
We started it really simple years ago, and we just kind of built onto it from then on. And that allowed us to do it comfortably, I guess. Now I feel like with everything with the pandemic, everybody's just kind of thrown into it. And there are so many different technologies and options out there where it can be overwhelming. The fact that we did start this years ago, we were kind of ahead of the curve, and we did it one small piece at a time. But the nice part is we put all that hard work into it, and now we're sharing it with all the other states to use.
So here's a snapshot of those agencies that Iowa DOT is partnering with. I'm actually involved in FHWA's Everyday Counts 5, now 6 initiative on virtual public outreach. And it's been really exciting to see their support as well. And so to close this out, I'm going to end with a few words from Scott, who you've seen before at Maine DOT, to talk a bit about where we're headed with this consortium.
What are some of the things that you think are working really well as we continue in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, the things that are really working well is that we are getting a lot of engagement, and our commissioner essentially said, this is how we will be doing things even after the pandemic. Maine is a pretty large state. It might be several hours to get to that meeting. A lot of us project managers have been to some of those meetings where we might have 2 people in the audience. And one thing we're finding is we're getting a lot more engagement with this process. So we're really finding that with that increased engagement, why would we go back to that old style of going to a 2-hour meeting where a lot of people might not be able to make it? And this way people can see it at their leisure.
So thanks so much for attending our session. This is absolutely my favorite topic, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion at the end. This is my email address. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like to talk more. And I'm going to pass it back over to you, Fernando.
Erica, thank you. Great presentation. Kind of continuing along with this theme of innovation. Let me, as we say that, we'll see if I can get this to share again. Great. So hopefully everybody can see my screen here. So next up on this session, discussing people, the Innovation Council, convene, collaborate, and conquer. Matt Junak, Senior Project Manager, Intelligent Transportation and Emerging Mobility Solutions at HNTB. Throughout Matt's career, he supported projects involving, ITS, connected and automated vehicles, transportation planning, traffic engineering, and highway design. Matt graduated from Michigan State University with a BSCE and MS in transportation, and he's going to kind of take us through, another one of the innovative ways in which we can try to get projects through the process, and help our clients. So with that, I will pass it over to Matt, and let me stop my share.
Thanks, Fernando. Good morning or getting on the brink of afternoon, everyone. Let's get the share going here. All right. All right. So thanks, Fernando, for the introduction. And yeah, kind of stemming off of that. So Erica talked about kind of, process of running meetings and engaging with people. And I'm going to kind of shift a little bit and talk about this idea of an innovation council and applying that to a project and how we applied that throughout the project process and how you can do the same. And so we're not focusing really on the project or exactly how the meetings are run as much as how, the idea and why we brought people together and the results of that. So, but because it is about a project and that's we're applying it there. First, just a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about Innovation Council. So the project is in Macomb County, Michigan. It's dubbed the Innovate Mountain Project. It's a 9-mile concrete pavement corridor that is undergoing a full reconstruction, and with the addition of lanes in one of the northern sections here for about a third of it. So a fairly large project for an arterial and for a county to take on. And as such, they, moving into the timeline, it's been somewhat of an 8-year, it's going to be an 8-year process, or about 4 years into it now, from when the initial stakeholders gathered together to figure out how outside the box we could fix this. Long story short, in 2018, a federal infra grant was awarded in order to reconstruct and use innovations on the corridor. And as such, we are now finishing up a design build style contract. And so its contractors are shortlisted, and the design build process will be starting in the springtime here in 2021. And moving forward by 23, substantial construction will be completed. So that's just a little bit of the project that we will be talking about, how we use this idea of the Innovation Council. So what the Innovation Council is the idea is to convene a group of industry thought leaders to inject innovations into the project. So essentially, it is expanding upon the stakeholder group that we typically would use. And this being a federally funded ITS project, of course, we're using the systems engineering process. And so throughout that, you involve stakeholders in the needs assessment and concept operations. But in order to make sure that we were able to as it says there on the slide, inject innovations and think outside the box, we brought additional stakeholders in from that, some that had relevance in the local area, and some just national leaders in different areas that were relevant to the county. And so you can see some of them in communications and everything. What was big as we're moving into a connected vehicle environment. So we had the Crown Castle and Teradata and Siemens involved to help navigate some of some of those areas, as well as a lot of local partners and innovators and startups like the Michigan Israeli Business Connector, who was bringing a lot of ideas from startups in Israel and ideas over there that could maybe be piloted or applied once all the infrastructure is laid out on the road. So we brought forth this group of the Innovation Council, and the idea was, first we of course worked with the county to confirm the roster, invited everyone and brought it together, and then we convened everyone together in a workshop just about a year ago now, in December of 2019. So when we convened everyone together, then we formed with the group the mission statement. So the mission statement we formed for this project was that Mound Road will be a transformative corridor of the future, using innovations throughout planning, design, construction, ongoing operations, and maintenance. Corridor will serve as an example of the future of mobility and as a testbed for emerging technologies that can improve safety and convenience in all aspects of modern life. It's a mission statement. It's big, it's huge. That was the point. And the point was to be bigger than just, we're going to rebuild the road because maintenance is costing too much every year. Of course, that's why we got here in the first place. So along with establishing the mission statement, we also established kind of, the expected outcomes of the Innovation Council with the group there at the first meeting. And that was that we wanted to log the innovative ideas and create an innovation register, a place to document them, and come up with needs-based solutions to help input for the project concept. These aren't stakeholders, or these are not project partners in that we are, buying products from, or we're looking for a Siemens or an Econolite, solution, as they are on the council. That it's, in fact, we had to be careful about that. Once we got to the point of writing requirements in the contract, the Innovation Council, was not involved with that, since there are products and bidding and everything else. But we were just looking at how we can involve the entire community, meaning the connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle community, in the project in order to have the most logical outcome. So the process then that we employed and used with the Innovation Council, and we kind of went through a series of meetings. And so at the top there, you see we came up with 5 categories to group our innovations and our thoughts into. And so going across the top, you can see those 5. And then the process through a series of meetings, we first, of course, established the council, which I've talked about, and then established an innovation register, basically a brainstorming, lay out all your thoughts, crazy or not, what can we do out here, flying cars, all of that. What are the thoughts? Let's get them registered down. Then we broke everyone up and into a needs assessment and brought the user perspective into it. And have a little bit more about that in another slide. And after we then had all the user needs and perspectives, we in a mobility workshop to then formulate our concept of operations, and which, for those familiar with ITS projects and everywhere else that the ConOps is used, then that really serves as a quite long, but a document that brings all of that together but with that people and that user needs perspective. And then the last outcome of this, which we'll get to at the end of this presentation here, is laying out this roadmap, which is kind of a graphical deployment plan. So, of course, I mentioned systems engineering before, and for those of you who are familiar, me being an ITS engineer, working a lot on federally funded projects, I play the V diagram game all day long. But this, the process that we employed really was analogous to this. And so the Innovation Council meetings, lined up with doing the needs assessment and the emerging mobility workshop before the concept of operations, which then allowed us to complete the roadmap, which allowed the project team to put together the system requirements. It's then going into the design build process, which will encompass all of the bottom of the V. So it is, of course, following along this process, but we made it a little bit more exciting than just doing the V diagram. So getting back to kind of the user needs and perspective. So the second meeting was all about, we went through essentially an exercise that said, as a blank, I need Mound Road, or I need the system, I need the project to do this for me. And so we ended up with these 11 perspectives. So these are essentially all of the different user groups. And as those that are familiar with the system engineering and process, is these user needs are then mapped and traced throughout into the requirements, and the then verification of all of the individual components of the plan are all traced back to meeting user needs. That is why we are doing this, is there is a need somewhere, and the user could be, the system, a truck driver, the county, the owner. So by having this large group, we are able to have representatives of all of the different users. Even if somebody from, say, one of the innovation partners was not playing that role on the project itself, they were able to put themselves in the shoes or give us that perspective in order to think about it that way on the project. That then led into the putting together the proposed system concept. So kind of the jumble on the side you see here is all the different sheets from the innovation register. So this is where we started copying down all those ideas and filling in more and more information as we moved along, and priorities and the ideas that really floated, and innovations and concepts that floated to the top as a priority were then taken in and followed through in the concept of operations. You can see here, talking about on this slide, how we went through and identified if they are a core or enabling concept, kind of things that we need to have. Fiber optic cable, for instance. We need to do that before we can do anything else that requires the communications on the job. And then prioritize them under highly consider or things that are tabled. They still then go into the concept of operations for the overall project, but maybe they're not included in the actual initial design build project that's reconstructing it. That then led to the full developing of the concept of operations. This slide here is just showing, of course, the ConOps is a semi-structured document, and then you can see some of the tables here are showing how these are leading. These are the needs assessment, and these different letters represent the different categories. And this is showing how, as an example of how the ConOps then is linking all of these things together, and providing that traceability from the initial concepts, user needs, and perspectives. The then end result of the Innovation Council process, where we kind of part ways with them for a while until the project is in deployment, to again alleviate any kind of conflict of interest once requirements are written and you get into contracting, is we develop the roadmap. And so the roadmap, the Innovate Mound Emerging Mobility Solutions roadmap, provides a time-phased implementation plan for the concept operations across the 5 innovation categories: the innovative design and administration, construction financing, connected and automated vehicles, roadside technology, operations and maintenance, asset management, infrastructure, and communications, software and data. So I'm not intending to go through all of these. I know you probably can't see all of the details on the screen here, but the point is that this is essentially the graphical, the deployment plan, the roadmap as it's called, for that links up with that innovation register that still contains all those notes and details from all those ideas. We then went one step further, which I don't have in this presentation, of choosing which ones of these actually were included and funded through the design build project and included within that scope, and not. Of course, not everything was able to be included. Those that aren't are still part of the full concept because they're on the roadmap. Now we're working on how we incorporate those overall into the program moving forward. So just a quick, I'm not going to go through all of the details for this particular project, but just since you can't see on the other slides, so you can see the pie slices as we called them, go through the pre-construction, construction, deployment, and then future phase, and shows the logical order and step of those enablers that need to happen first. Updating special provisions and specifications and benchmarking best practices pretty much across the board for all the categories, into then getting the construction phase, all of the actual, this is of course is infrastructure one, so you see cameras and sensors and street lighting and fiber optic communications, and those then enable mobility hubs and small cell deployment in the future. As an example, we went through and we have these pie slices, as I was calling them, for each one of the categories there. And with that, I want to end it, and thank you. Contact information is there. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about how we use this idea of the Innovation Council to run through the process of a project, and we'll take questions at the end. Fernando.
Matt, thank you. Great presentation. And Innovate Mound is is truly a benchmark for the future of how getting a group of industry leaders together to push projects through. I think it's a great example. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. So if I get back to my share again. And as everybody could see, I think Matt has a COVID beard that from as compared to his bio picture, it's indicative of him being at home for a lot longer time. But thanks again, Matt. So going into our final session, and this one's going to be more of a panel discussion, and I'm going to take a little bit longer to kind of highlight some of the information before getting into this panel, because I think it is important. So looking at the technology side, we're going to be discussing the CoMotion Lab Miami, which is a public-private partnership leading the way in mobility innovation. And starting it off from HNTB, Beth Kegel, she is the Vice President and National Practice Consultant for ITS. Beth is a global thought leader in mobility and smart city ecosystems, and is responsible for assisting transportation agencies, cities, and regions in developing smart and connected infrastructure solutions. Joining Beth on the panel, and we're so happy to have them on, is John Rassant, who is the founder and CEO of CoMotion, and Carlos Cruz Casas, who is the Assistant Director of Miami-Dade County Transportation and Public Works. So a little bit of information. John is the founder and chairman of the New Cities Foundation. It's a major nonprofit research institution based in Montreal. He believes that it's imperative that public and private stakeholders work together to improve the quality, the quality of life, through generating and scaling ideas, solutions through events, research, and urban innovation projects. Carlos, as the Assistant Director of Strategic Planning, his primary focus is to introduce mobility innovations and plan for fully integrated transportation systems. His career both includes the public and the private sector experience, ranging from conceptual design to the implementation of pedestrian, bicycle transit, and traffic projects. So, really, before I let the panelists go, what is CoMotion? So CoMotion Lab Miami, we call it C-Lab, basically brings together industry leaders and policymakers in a completely unique way, fostering collaboration, innovation, and sharing the ideas to develop and validate new and impactful transport technologies. Now, I could have read a lot more, but instead of me reading, I just want to turn it over to the panel, and I think this will be a great presentation. So at that, I'm going to turn off my share, and I am going to introduce the panels. Beth, Carlos, John.
Great, thank you so much, Fernando. I want to thank Penn State and everyone who's out there watching. First of all, I just want to say that I'm excited to be here with our esteemed panelists, Carlos and John, to share with you a recently launched public-private partnership effort here in Florida. Before we really dive in, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context about the Florida vision, and we could talk about how this fits within it. Florida is the third most populous state in the nation. It's growing. We have about just under 22 million people today, and within the next 10 years, Florida is expected to grow to 26 million. Prior to COVID-19, we had reached a record of 130 million tourists annually from out of state and out of country, and we expect that to grow to 150 million annually by 2030. With this tremendous growth, including the expected growth in goods movement, mobility innovation has actually been at the forefront for Florida's leaders, from connected and automated vehicle legislation beginning in 2012 to transportation policy, pilots and implementations, and of course, public and private sector collaborations, including academia. The state, through the Florida Turnpike, invested in a world-class testing facility as well called SunTrax, which is located in the center of the state for testing of tolling and connected and automated technology in more of a closed environment or laboratory, with a 2.25 mile track, as well as various urban, suburban, rural, and weather scenarios within the infield. But today, we're here to talk about a living laboratory in an open environment in the most populous county in the state of Florida, Miami-Dade County, called CoMotion Lab Miami, affectionately called C-Lab for short. So with that, I'd like us to dive in and tell you a little bit more about it. And I'm going to start with you, Carlos. Again, thank you for being here and leading this for Miami-Dade County. Let me ask you this. Miami-Dade County has had a big, bold vision for innovation. Can you share a little bit about that and what spurred the idea of C-Lab for Miami-Dade County in this collaboration?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Beth, and thank you for having me here. I'm excited about this opportunity, right? So, Miami-Dade County and in Florida, innovation is our blood, right? Often confused with just technology. It's more about how we approach the problems that we have at hand and looking from a different point of view, right? And for us we have limited resources, we have limited ability to really move people, and as we continue to grow, we need to be more efficiently addressing those urban needs in Miami-Dade County and throughout the entire state. My job, my responsibility to our community, like you mentioned before, is to bring mobility innovation, right? And I really want to tackle that in trying to start opening the doors to a lot more and perhaps things that we don't know. And over the last couple of years, let me tell you, I've seen a big drastic change in transportation and mobility as a whole, right? In Miami, it's a big area, and it's in a place of focus for many different companies. And since I joined here, my phone hasn't stopped ringing. I have calls for a lot of different companies out there that want to come down to Miami and deploy their technologies. And you can imagine, I fell in love with each one of them. And it was heartbreaking if you think about it, the fact that I had to say, unfortunately, I just don't need it right now, right? And that to me is something that we need to address. And we're missing something, and we're not missing the solutions because they're right there. What we're missing is a place for local and even private entities to voice their needs to the world so that we can help identify solutions. And my hope in what explores this idea is the fact that we're equipped to do infrastructure improvements, we're equipped to run services, we're equipped to really establish a playground for innovation, but what we need is partners to come down into a structured way. That way we can make the most, we don't waste anyone's time, and we actually make a very productive effort moving forward. And to me is, from Miami, things can continue to grow. We have other entities throughout Miami-Dade County and throughout the state that can really enjoy this effort.
Thanks, Carlos. And John, CoMotion, yes, headquartered in Montreal, but a global organization. CoMotion is invested in this partnership. I'm excited. HNTB is a founding member and sits on the board of directors of this. Can you share some of your insights too? And then I'd really like you and Carlos to both share with our audience here a little bit about the mission and the structure of C-Lab and the near and long-term goals.
Yeah, thanks, Beth, and thanks, Carlos, and also, I want to thank the HNTB and the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, because I really have been very much enjoying the conversation, and I think one of the things that we deeply believe is that cities and regions must learn from each other. And so the fact that we're gathering virtually in Pennsylvania, listening to about the Innovative Mound project in Michigan, and the Innovation Council that you set up there, that we're talking about Miami, is really great. And I'm honored also to be taking part. We've always looked up to Pennsylvania as a leader in mobility and transportation. Bill Peduto, the mayor of Pittsburgh, we were honored to have him speak at our recent Commotion LA conference a couple of weeks ago. If I think of the Carnegie Mellon as the birthplace of autonomous transportation in many ways. But we're really excited about what we're part of with C-Lab in Miami, because we started, as Beth mentioned, starting in 2012, the change in the regulatory environment in Florida became a much more, it's always been pro-business, but it was much more open, engaging with big players in the mobility industry, saying, we want to be a kind of playground for innovation here in Florida. So we sensed that things were starting to move in a really big way. We were really impressed by the work that both Carlos was doing and has been doing at the Miami-Dade Department of Transportation, that Beth Kegel has been involved with. And when a couple of years ago, when I first met the then mayor of Miami-Dade County, Mayor Jimenez, so impressed by his openness to mobility innovation, that this was going to be a lever to really improve the lives of Floridians, of people who live in Miami. He was also someone who really understood technology, which is also somewhat rare among policymakers. So we felt that in a very real way that this was a great, could be a great proving ground. And we talked with Carlos and his friends, and we realized that if you take Miami-Dade County, you have 5,500 miles of roads to play with, that the county controls, the airspace, maritime channels. And Florida is kind of interesting because for cities that are on water, using those maritime channels for transit can be quite interesting option. It's a little bit less true in many parts of Pennsylvania, but anyway. One of the things about the C-Lab is that there's no blueprint. And as I think, Carlos, we'll talk about a little later on, we looked at what was happening in Los Angeles, where the city set up something called the Urban Movement Labs, which was last year. We looked at how New York City has been working with the Transit Tech Lab. In Chicago, similar thing. So the idea is to bring together some key stakeholders, and look at what are the kinds of things that we can really usefully pilot in this county. And I think, Beth, maybe you'll talk about, and Carlos will talk about how we, the next steps. I don't want to dominate the conversation.
No problem at all, John. I think, Carlos, it'll be helpful to the audience to hear a little bit more about the structure of C-Lab and kind of where we are today and where we're going.
Definitely. So this is a fully public and private kind of journey that we're embarking on. The structure that we're trying to figure out and put it together. We have, of course, our board of advisors, our basically upper kind of administration, if you will, type of engagement. But since this is something that is built with innovation in mind, built to identify solutions that we don't know about it right now, we're going to be delivering those basically exploratory environments, those pilots, those proving grounds in Miami-Dade County from a task force point of view. So what you will see is the development of different task forces addressing particular issues that are happening in Miami-Dade County, as well as many other places across the nation. So right now, what we initiated with 2 task forces that are of kind of an immediate need, but at the same time, rubbing on the edge of the innovation, what's ahead of us. So basically, we don't fall behind. The first one is a smart infrastructure and curb management. Is something that's being kind of mentioned a lot over the last couple of years. And basically, what we want to do, instead of continuing to do studies, they just try something now. Let's get the right people together in a room to identify what are the use cases and what are the solutions to get it through. So of course, we're going to have local entities in Miami-Dade County, the cities. We have 34 cities, including Miami, Miami Beach, and many other within the county. We have parking authorities. We have, state departments. All those need to be participating of this conversation, as well as private sector community from both the delivery side, the infrastructure side, the communication side, safety side. All of this is going to be kind of coming together and really addressing and developing a plan to move forward, right? The other task force that we have kind of launched is the urban air mobility, the electric takeoff and landing, vertical takeoff and landing. So it is something that we acknowledge that the technology is right there. And we see a lot of potential use cases being developed, but we feel that we need to help the public entities kind of elevate their voices, right? So those are the first 2 things that are coming in, and I'm really enthusiastic about the number of task forces and committees that can actually expand from here, because there's going to be more and more needs to come through. And the other aspect that I didn't touch a little bit on it, but I would love to mention is one of my kind of targeted goals of this too is to build innovation leadership throughout Miami-Dade County. We have 50, maybe 60 different agencies out there, and there's a lot of great talent. And I would love to do is to help extract that talent from the public entities and bring them into a safe space that they can innovate, collaborate with the private sector, identify solutions, put them on the ground, and then reevaluate and evolve from that. This is going to really allow for a cross, jurisdictional, jurisdictional point of view to really engage in identifying solutions moving forward. And this is just the beginning, right? And from here, well, what I'm hoping is that it doesn't stay in Miami-Dade County. And what I'm hoping is that we can help partner with adjacent counties here in South Florida, as well with cities and counties throughout the entire nation. There is a lot for us to really engage, that we can learn from each other. And the fact that we don't have to be, starting every single time from scratch.
Well, I think one of the things that's really interested, this has a focus on public-private partnership. And if you look at the building out of the board of advisors, the board of directors, and the task force members, you'll see members from public sector, private sector, including academia. So it is a true collaboration, putting all of the great minds together to move things forward within the county. And also the hope is for this not to be just impact for Miami-Dade County, but also to the broader region, and even possibly at the statewide level, which is being embraced by our state leaders, which is really terrific. Something that's so important to all of this, of course, is the engagement of those innovators, those technology companies from all over the world, because some of the best of the brightest come from within Florida, Miami-Dade, the US, but also there are many others in other parts of the world. John, what kind of reaction have we seen from industry globally related to this concept? What kind of interest are we seeing?
I think really very a lot of excitement, and we were quite surprised, in fact, in some ways, because companies, for example, some very innovative companies in Europe in the aviation field who were not even present at all in Florida, in fact, not even in North America, saw this and saw this is really interesting. We want to be part of this. We see that Florida and Southern Florida can be a very emerging market for new kinds of aviation, urban aviation solutions. We want to develop this market. And the fact that there is this openness in Florida is really important. So there is a kind of welcome that. I want to just return to one thing, Beth and Carlos, and I think one of the important decisions that was made quite early on was not to put C-Lab within the government, to have it outside. Because, I mean, Carlos, you can confirm this, but, you know, I think for quite a long time, there was quite a lot of talk in Miami about, you know, should the county have a Department of Innovation or an innovation ombudsperson who could guide some of this. And I think you felt, and we certainly agreed with you, that it would be most effective to house this outside as a real public-private partnership.
Agree.
It's not always structure, but we can be so much more flexible. We can move so much more quickly. And I think, you know, other cities around the nation are kind of working this out. So in Michigan, for example, with the Michigan Central project in Detroit, you know, I understand that began as Ford, obviously, and Ford put up all the money. That will become a 501c3, a nonprofit. Urban Movement Labs in Los Angeles has now been set up as a 501c3. Chicago, it's actually for profit. So there's a sort of mix of models out there. Carlos?
Oh, yeah, I think there's some point. The way that we saw it is how we can be sustainable moving this forward and how we can scale up, right? If we do deliver solutions and innovation for Miami-Dade County, yes, it's going to be fine with us. But from a core point of view, that doesn't help that much people outside. And what we look into is can we identify a trusted partner that can be universal in their approach, that can be from a point of view that not necessarily have to be tied and targeted only to Miami-Dade County or, you know, the cities within Miami-Dade County, but the state can really benefit from this. And the other counties within the state of Florida can actually do it, and other cities across the entire nation. That, to me, there's a larger benefit by taking this, you know, outside of the department or the county kind of environment, still be attached to the hip. Because, you know, we text, we call, we have an organizational structure that allows us to really be embedded in this, but at the same time give C-Lab more of a freedom to explore, a freedom to really benefit and really kind of scale up. Ultimately, you know, it's a tide that will raise all boats and not necessarily the ones that are living in Miami. And I think that's the greater benefit that we can achieve through this.
Well, Carlos, I think that's a great way to close out our panel here. We know that there are questions out there for us and for the other presenters. And I just want to thank you very much for participating. And again, thank you, Penn State, our hosts, and we look forward to any questions that would come our way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Beth, John, Carlos, fantastic presentation. You know, I understand we probably could have talked an hour on C-Lab Miami, but I guess you know, in to try to manage the clock a little bit here, I think we do have a couple questions. Let me just kind of see if I can peek through some of them. And again, this could be random order here. I'm just trying to come up with some ideas here. We'll stay with C-Lab right now, I guess, since we are talking about this. So in Carlos' discussion, C-Lab reminds me of a local city MPO on steroid, you know, with the addition of P3, which can spur projects and initiatives. You know, what are some of the design projects that were implemented by the task force or, you know, is still in the infancy of the planning stage? And if we just kind of quick hit answer, Carlos, and then we can kind of move along.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, we're still in the infancy right now with developing the task forces. We are focusing on infrastructure kind of improvements, very light technology pilots, but what we're doing is leveraging everything that we're doing on our side. The county will do care management, basically facilitate the space, will be protected bike lanes, we'll do signal improvements, we'll do smart LED, all that we're setting in place. So that's going to allow for a little innovation to happen, to try new solutions and really feedback to us and do more.
Fantastic, thank you. Let me go through here. I guess this is one for Matt for Innovation Mound. Innovation Mound, again, I'll kind of preface this down a little bit here. You know, it's very similar to PennDOT Connect's process, you know, where we try to engage local stakeholders, you know, throughout the project. But I guess, you know, with Innovation Mound, you also reached out to not just the stakeholders, but a lot of the industry leaders to help the, you know, the local DOT, you know, with the project. So, you know, in a quick little answer, do you have any examples of, maybe any of the unforeseen benefits, that came out of innovation, the Innovation Mound process, that benefited your client or your stakeholders?
Yeah, I guess really we did it for us and for the project to get more in that, but that is actually a really good point. It did end up benefiting some of the stakeholders. I don't have a specific example, but there's no good way to measure it. So now it's something to think about. But we definitely get a lot of comments back from some of the specific, especially technology partners that had never sat in and been in a ConOps meeting on the agency side that actually saw how a transportation project is developed. Yet they're building products for our marketplace the whole time. And so I'm sure there were benefits there, and they certainly appreciated it.
Great. All right. Thank you. All right, I have one here. I think this will be for Erica. How knowledgeable do you have to be with the PIMA tool, for an end user, a DOT employee or other client to manage? How much work is it, to keep updating the tool if a public meeting needs to be added or a new task, that's added to the project? So I'll let you answer that one, Erica.
Yeah, really good question. So it's very intuitive. I'm not a developer myself, and I manage a lot of the public involvement processes here in Massachusetts for our client. Just as a point of reference, Iowa DOT, it's just the two individuals that you saw speaking, Valerie and John, that manage all of their projects for the whole state. And so it really is meant to kind of make the tasks more streamlined and easy to do. And then I guess to answer the second part of that question in terms of task management, so it's automated and built into the system. So if you schedule a public meeting or a public information meeting, there's different tasks based on the agency SOPs that become associated with that. So once you say, I have a public meeting today, December 10th, then it kind of backfills a calendar of tasks that then get pushed out to specific individuals at the organization. So it's very intuitive.
Great. Fantastic. And I guess I have one quick question here. I guess this is probably more for Beth, John, or Carlos as well. Has there been dialogue with any other states or any other DOTs as far as the mobility innovation labs throughout the country? Either working together, or is there plans for future partnerships with other states?
Carlos, would you like to answer that? And John?
So I will start from the innovation kind of labs. We have been in conversation with Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and London, and a couple others, more from innovation lab point of view. And it's been phenomenal because I think there's a lot of lessons learned that we can do, so we don't have to start from the beginning every single time. But most importantly to me is that we build a network of trust, that we can try things here in Miami-Dade County that can then be done in LA and somewhere else, and vice versa, that I feel comfortable that what Chicago is doing with their amazing work in there, and instead of trying it here, I can just tap into it and say, bring it to Miami. So that is, to me, a phenomenal approach. And yeah, I think the solid point, the fact that we need to get more states and private and public entities to really be engaged.
Fantastic. Yeah, I don't want to cut you off. I want to give John a couple last words here before we probably get booted off. So John, you want to take a crack at it?
I think in some ways that's the most exciting thing of what we're doing at C-Lab is the possibility of creating a real federation of city innovation labs, not only in North America, but as Carlos mentioned, we've been talking a lot to the folks in London. I think we should bring in Paris and Bogota, places like that. I think cities around the world need to learn from each other about how to better organize transit and mobility. So I think that's a really exciting thing. We shouldn't think that, for example, here in LA, we're working, we have to keep it very close to our chest and not communicate with Miami or Detroit. It's and it's not either or. We have to do it together, I think.
Fantastic. And I think we've answered the questions that we had live. I think we've typed in a couple to back up some of the live responses. Then we got about 2 minutes left here. I just want to say thank you to all the participants, all the panelists. that put a lot of time into this. I think we put together a great presentation on technology, on the process, on people, how things need to be done. And, like I said, I think it was just a great compilation of ideas. And I just want to say thank you again for dedicating the time to the conference in Penn State.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fernando, thanks, Steve, for hosting, and Penn State. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.